Someone as useless as you should just go home. Grace, the CEO's daughter, said this to me. The grape juice she splashed on me made my head go cold. Why did she hate me so much? I turned my head, unable to fathom her irrational behavior. But I was in the middle of a friend's party. I didn't want to inconvenience my friend at his company's 100-year anniversary party. I understand, but I didn't enjoy the notion of being mocked, so I resolved to get back at her before leaving the place. After that, I talked it over with a friend and decided to get back at Grace. I felt bad about her background, which had come to light, but I had something to protect too. Grace would suffer the consequences of my actions. My name is David Lewis. I'm a middle-aged man who just turned 44. I'm a man who believes in fortune-telling and jinxes, so I was disappointed to learn that the fortune teller had predicted that something unpleasant would happen to me this year. I'm the CEO of a food company. I'm simply an ordinary guy, but owing to the people around me, I've been able to achieve success. I'm good at using my head, but I'm not good at paperwork, so you should be the CEO and build the company. In return, I'll develop a bunch of good products. I have quite a few followers on social media, but I'm too nervous to show my face. I'm struggling to get any more new followers. Why don't we team up? I'll do some publicity for you. In short, I guess I was lucky. I was fortunate to be surrounded by people who needed one another, which led me to become the leader of the company. Because I was forced to take care of the little kids in the neighborhood from about the time I was in the upper grades of elementary school, in a sense, it was inevitable. David, can you take care of my child? I'm sorry, David. My daughter likes you, so will you help her with her studies? Every time someone asks me something like that, no, I'm a little busy, or I have other things to do too, I would refuse them. But perhaps because I looked like a weak-minded person, I often found myself taking care of others. But thanks to that, I am now working hard as the CEO of the company. I feel that having someone rely on me every day was not a negative thing, and I find great satisfaction in my everyday life as CEO. One day, the first spring storm blew. It was lunchtime, so I was walking outside. I was not in the city, but on the premises of the company I worked for. I felt working all day would be suffocating, so I constructed a tiny garden, which I heard was very popular. I looked around and saw a few employees walking around, chatting and laughing happily. I have a new project that's about to go through. It's all thanks to our CEO's proactive approach. I heard the CEO was at the event the other day. I'm surprised he made it, even though he had plans at a distant office the day before. Apparently, they were talking about me, but I didn't talk to them. I was confident they preferred to spend their break time away from the hierarchy. So as long as they didn't say or do something ridiculous, I'd ignore them, even if they were gossiping about me. I sat on a bench in the corner of the yard, watching the employees spend their free time in their own way. As I sat there in a daze, forgetting about the morning's work, a young female employee spoke to me. Mr. Lewis, thank you for your help the other day. The one who bowed to me was a female employee in her 20s. She was Nora Jones, and she came to work for this company because the name included the word Jones. I remember her speaking about that when I happened to be watching the interview. Oh, don't worry. I was the only one there and I didn't do anything special. When I said that, Nora took a handkerchief out of her pocket. Nora and I share the same train line and stop. That's why I handed her the handkerchief the other day when I saw her tumble and fall at the station.
Thank you so much for that time. It would have been difficult to go home with an injured knee, so...
I'm glad my handkerchief helped. She must have ironed the handkerchief carefully. After receiving the wrinkle-free handkerchief,
And please, take this.
she handed me a small package with a well-known branded handkerchief.
It's got a muffin with fruit inside, so please eat it as soon as possible. I hope you like muffin.
Of course I like it. I like fruits in general too. Smiling as I accepted the package, Nora breathed a sigh of relief. She looked happy for a while, but then, as if remembering something, her expression turned serious and she opened her mouth.
Can I talk to you for a minute? I've received some bad news about the company with which we are now doing business.
Nora, who had been a bit hesitant, turned her worried eyes toward me and continued her story.
I heard that the head of the sales department of a potential client company is the daughter of a wealthy CEO, but I haven't heard anything good about her. Even I, a development department employee, heard about it, so I assumed she was pretty horrible.
After she finished saying that, she slowly looked at me as if to check my mood. I smiled to reassure her. Since she said it out of concern for me, there was no reason for me to be in a bad mood, so I thanked her from the bottom of my heart. Is that so? It's a great information. Thanks for letting me know. When I thanked her, Nora looked relieved, winked at me, and left. The person she was referring to in the rumors was probably a woman named Grace Clark. According to my memory, her hair was curled like a croissant and had the color of a well-baked bread. She was a classmate of mine in high school. However, she was now the daughter of the CEO of her parents' food processing company and attended the office every day. I heard she became the department head thanks to her connections, but she wasn't doing well in her position. For some reason, she was hostile toward me. I don't have any good memories of her because she used to mess with me every day in high school. One thing in particular stands out in my mind. Just because I bought 2 cans of juice, why should I give you 1? When I said I'd treat you to something, I meant the air around here. She heard what juice I wanted and bought it right in front of me. Given the circumstances, anyone would have assumed she had purchased it for me. There was no way a mean girl like that could work in society properly. Grace was discussing the terms of the transaction with our personnel frequently at the time. I hoped there wouldn't be any unnecessary problems. A few days later, just before lunchtime, I was faced with a headache in the office. I was intrigued as to what was going on, and it appears that she is acting quite selfishly. After hearing what Nora told me the other day, I was thinking I should tell our employees to be cautious when meeting with Grace for business. So after hearing from the receptionist that Grace had arrived, I was standing in front of the door to the conference room where she was, listening in on what was going on. As I held my head down and listened carefully, I could hear a piercing yell coming from inside the conference room. I'm the CEO's daughter, and all you have to offer me is this lousy hospitality?
I'm sorry to hear that, but we prepare the best stuff to welcome you.
Even the coffee tastes horrible. I think you just served what the average person drinks. Their conversation had been like this the whole time. Grace was just exploding with frustration, and they could not get to the important details of the deal. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn which surprised me. Forget it. Then why don't you call David Lewis here? He works here, right? I saw his face at an event here a while ago. He's just a regular employee who has nothing to do. He should be able to come down immediately.
No, he's not a regular employee.
What? He's a person who's only capable of flattering the right people. So of course, he doesn't have much to do. Just call him up. Grace apparently didn't know my position. If she had listened carefully to the male employee's statements, she would have recognized I had a high position, but she was too busy doing what she wanted.
I have a grudge against that guy. I'm going to use this chance to make him work. I can't bear the fact that he's a nothing man who's just lucky to have people around him and is having so much fun. I'm sure he's still the same incompetent man he's always been.
I cringed when I heard Grace's words. I wondered if that's why she harassed me in high school. Furthermore, I couldn't believe she was still holding a grudge. At that, Grace continued to make reckless demands and spit out words of dissatisfaction towards me. With such a situation, there was no way the deal was going to go forward. After an hour of futility, Grace left. If I didn't take action against her right away, my employees would be left to fend for themselves. So I contacted a certain person I knew and asked him for advice. A few nights later, I went to a bar to talk to my friend about Grace. As I walked into the crowded bar, he had already arrived and waved to me, calling my name.
Hey, over here! It's been a while, David.
Perhaps he already had a few drinks and his face was already red. His name was Jacob Hall, and he smiled warmly. We met in swimming class in junior high school. We never went to the same school, but we often saw each other at swimming lessons. He was the same age as me, and his birthday was a few days later than mine. I apologize for getting to the subject so quickly, but could you help me with something? Actually, it's about a company CEO's daughter. I greeted Jacob, ordered some finger foods, and began chatting with him. After finishing his conversation with me, he ate some chips served by a waitress and opened his mouth.
Sounds like you're having a hard time.
Well, Grace is pretty good looking, but she has a difficult personality, so it's no surprise. Do you know her?
Yeah. I never told you before, but we were classmates in middle school.
Jacob seemed to remember Grace from that time in considerable detail.
She was very rich and always tried to one-up others. When she got into the pool, her hair would come undone like a croissant, and she'd look like a goddess. But when she talked, she was scary as a demon.
I wondered why Jacob would occasionally praise her. Maybe he was in love with Grace back then. Should I not mention it? While I was thinking about it, the conversation went on.
She's been a pain in the ass since junior high school. When I or the others bought her a juice, she would stomp on it. I wondered why she did that, but when I learned about her past, I understood.
After he had said all that, Jacob turned silent and reached for a glass of water instead of alcohol. He moistened his tongue and opened his mouth again.
Grace's dad was the CEO of a cheap beverage company. It seems he was selling drinks based on the concept of making it easy to drink even for those who had no money. But the company went out of business because it wasn't profitable. The family fell apart and her parents divorced. Grace's mother took her in.
It happened when she was in junior high school. Jacob didn't know much about what happened before junior high school. But according to him, before her parents' divorce, Grace's personality was relatively normal. I didn't know Grace had a past like that. However, the Grace I remembered was quite a spendthrift, so it was hard to believe that her father's company had gone bankrupt. Jacob read my mind.
Her mother was a very capable person, he continued. I heard that after that, her mother started a company and started selling bottled water. It seems that her business strategy was so successful that she became rich. But then, she handed over the company to someone else, and now she is the CEO of a food company. I'm sure it must be complicated for her daughter if something like that happened.
It certainly didn't sound like a good-for-you kind of story. Grace's mother, who followed in Grace's father's footsteps, achieved success in a way that was diametrically opposed to the idea of easy drinking for low-income people. And as soon as she succeeded, she abandoned the company like it was no longer needed. I don't know how Grace felt about her father. However, I thought it was enough reason for her personality to be rough. However, I couldn't feel compassion for her when it came to my company and my subordinates, so we were back at square one. I came to Jacob for advice, hoping to get some kind of solution. While I was holding my head in my hands over a drink, Jacob put his hand on my shoulder.
My company is having a party to celebrate 100 years in business. I'll invite Grace there and I'll talk to her. These things can get complicated when two people who don't get along talk to each other. And I, as a third party, have no choice but to warn her.
I appreciate that, but are you sure? Can I ask you that favor?
I don't know how to say it, but I just can't leave her alone. I'm not doing it just for you, so don't worry too much about it.
Well, thanks. Jacob was actually the CEO of a company. He was the CEO of a well-known company that's been in business for 100 years. In such a situation, it would have been beneficial to his company if he had done it as a favor for us. Therefore, I assumed he was a good guy. Anyway, I was invited to the party. However, I wanted to avoid seeing Grace before she and Jacob spoke, since it would complicate things. A few weeks later, I was visiting the top floor of a hotel. I was there to attend a party held by Jacob's company to celebrate its foundation. I got there relatively early. Grace always arrived late for parties like this, so I figured I could still wander around the venue. A number of tables were set up in the room. It looked like a standing buffet was being served to the guests. Ladies and gentlemen with plates were speaking, laughing, and eating as they liked. I looked at the faces of those present and asked the woman standing next to me. I've been busy for a while, so it's been a while since I've attended a party like this. How about you? Have you ever been to a party before? The woman I called out to was Nora. She was dressed formally rather than in her typical office attire.
No, I wonder if it's really okay for me to be here.
Nora looked around, whispering back to me. She just rolled her eyes as she looked at the other people's dresses and the food served at the venue. It's your grandfather's hotel, so of course it's okay. Actually, the hotel belonged to her grandfather. I only found out about it a few days ago. I was relaxing in the garden when she came to me and inquired about the party I was attending. It turned out that the venue was the hotel owned by her grandfather. After a few things happened from there, she decided to attend the party with me.
My grandfather lives in a different house, and we don't really interact much. So I'm puzzled by the suddenness of it all.
I was puzzled because when Nora gave me back the handkerchief, she also gave me an item from a fairly well-known brand. But that would make sense if her grandfather was wealthy. But then I wondered why I didn't get a rich vibe from Nora. While I was thinking about that, she seemed to have read my thoughts.
I don't like using my grandfather's or parents' connections or receiving excessive support. I don't feel like I'm doing well on my own.
I thought it was good that she was in an environment where she did not have to work, but she did not make use of the opportunity. The reason why Nora was with me was to introduce the hotel. Her grandfather, who had a bad back, had asked her to promote his hotel, so she decided to accompany me. If her grandfather hadn't hurt his back, he would have come to see me, but alas, he didn't recover.
My grandfather has been wanting to introduce this hotel to you for a long time, Mr. Lewis. He said he wanted to actively promote the hotel to any company that would improve its performance in the future.
I'm a little flattered that the manager of such a lovely hotel thought so. I turned my gaze to the interior of the venue. It was obvious at a glance that a lot of money had been spent, but there were no ornate decorations. The room was harmonious and elegant. As I was chatting with Nora while getting a drink from a passing staff member, a woman talked to me. It was Grace. I was surprised. It was still early in the day, but she was there, perhaps on a whim. She was wearing a white dress with large white grape-like jewels sewn into her dress and a chocolate-colored bag slung over her shoulder. On top of that, she was wearing a red hat shaped like a strawberry on her head, which made me think she looked like a fruit parfait.
Well, well, well. I knew I'd seen you somewhere. It's you, David. I haven't seen you since high school.
Yeah, you are right. It's been a long time. Actually, I heard Grace's voice behind the door the other day, but I couldn't tell her the truth, so I had to go along with her. However, it had been a really long time since we'd seen each other in person. Although she was getting older, her personality did not seem to have changed much. Her boastful expression and condescending gaze were still the same. Only her croissant-like hair had disappeared without a trace. Maybe it was because I worked for a food company, but it seemed like a shame. I thought it looked delicious, like bread. I muttered to myself as I glanced at her head, and it appeared she had heard me.
What is it with you all? Is it trendy to talk about people's hairstyles? That's what Jacob said the other day when I met him. He said, "Did the dogs eat your croissant too?" What issue do you all have with my hairstyle?
My bad. If she could discern from those words that I was talking to her hair, I wondered if she was aware that it resembled a croissant even then. I wondered, but didn't dare to say it out loud. Grace, who had regained her composure, poked me in the chest as if to make fun of me.
I can't believe that a person like you, who can only rely on the help of others, is here. Did you come to help someone? Why don't you go to your master? You still look like you're poor.
I suppose she had no idea I was the one who headed the company. Grace sneered at me as she looked at me. Nora stood next to me with a miffed face.
But he's cool.
She whispered a counter-argument, but her appraisal made me nervous. What kind of work do you do now, Grace? I decided to digress for now.
Unlike you, I'm living comfortably every day.
She didn't know what I was thinking, so she started to speak proudly of herself. But there was not much to it. She was the head of the sales department, but she had nothing concrete to say. Grace would only say that her staff were uncaring or that the elderly were overly loud in their complaints.
Speaking of which, what happened to all those geniuses around you? Oh, they must have abandoned you long ago. Except for your friends, you aren't appealing.
I was getting more and more annoyed. Can I go now? I have something to do. With that, I tried to go away, but Grace followed me for some reason.
Why don't you just leave? There's nothing a worthless person like you can do in a place like this.
I guess Nora had run out of patience with her outburst. With a disgruntled look on her face, Nora retorted to Grace.
Our CEO is not useless. He helped me when I was in trouble, and he cares about his subordinates. He was also concerned about his employees when you annoyed the sales department here by claiming to be the CEO's daughter.
Grace, hearing these words, snickered and replied to Nora's words.
I've seen you around for quite some time, but who are you? Don't say random things. This is none of your business. And are you saying that this guy is the CEO? No, that's impossible. Aren't you being fooled?
Nora's expression turned grim, but she seemed to calm down when I told her to calm down. But Grace didn't seem to calm down.
Why do you look so calm? Stay out of my sight now. You're annoying.
She grabbed a glass from a neighboring table and spilled the contents across my head.
Someone as useless as you should just go home.
I could smell the grape juice and feel my head getting colder and colder. At the same time, I could feel the stares from people around me. If I didn't leave, the atmosphere in the hall would deteriorate, and I would cause trouble for Jacob, so I decided to leave. I understand, but I didn't enjoy the notion of being mocked, so I resolved to get back at her before leaving the place. Your whole body looks like a fruit parfait, and if I were near you, I might accidentally eat you. The guests around us burst out laughing at my words, which I said politely on purpose so that people would hear them. Before Grace, who blushed, could say anything, I swiftly left the room. After leaving the party venue, I washed my head in the hotel bathroom. It was a blessing in disguise that the bathrooms were open to non-guests as well. After that, I gave some money to Nora and asked her to buy me a suitable change of clothes. For some reason, she handed me a cool, model-inspired attire. I would have been content with anything as long as I could change into it, but I was curious why she chose this outfit. About these clothes?
What's wrong with them? I thought I chose clothes that would look good on you, Mr. Lewis.
But I'm not a model or anything. Well, who cares? It looked like she chose inexpensive clothes, and although I was embarrassed by the type of clothes, I couldn't complain because they were cheap. But when I changed clothes, I found that they were easy to move in and seemed to fit surprisingly well. Maybe Nora had good taste in choosing clothes. I would have liked to have left the hotel and gone back to the office, but there were still some things I had to do. So I settled down in a coffee shop in the hotel and talked with Nora. I needed to get a description of the hotel from her. The bathroom was very nice. I'd be happy to use it for events, but we could also look at it in terms of a company trip.
Really? I'll tell my grandfather. I'm sure he'll be delighted.
At any rate, I was getting hungry, so we talked about the hotel over lunch. We talked about the history and features of the hotel, the main services offered, the price of renting a room at the event, etc. The hotel looked quite nice, and I looked forward to actively considering using it. While we were talking about this, Jacob came to the hotel. After greeting Nora, Jacob took a seat at the table where we were sitting.
I heard from the others. I've heard something terrible happened to you.
I guess he was aware of what happened to us, but he couldn't come looking for us right away because he was the host of the party. He apologized apologetically.
It took me a while to greet the guests. My bad.
Don't worry about it. I'm happy that I had the opportunity to clean up in the shower. Jacob had his reasons, so there was no reason to feel bad for him. He looked relieved when I said that.
But I thought you had some nerve when I found you eating at the coffee shop.
Oh, that's because I had another matter to attend to. Then, Jacob looked at Nora and nodded in understanding.
Oh, another matter, huh? So you were having fun on a date with your girlfriend.
Come on, how did you get to that conclusion? It's not like that at all. For some reason, Jacob gave me a cold look, Nora's cheeks flushed, she lowered her head, and I glanced at both of them expectantly. She would never consider me, someone much older than her, as a love interest. I was sure Nora would be annoyed to hear Jacob talk like that. She must have been blushing with embarrassment. For Nora's sake, I assumed I'd have to correct Jacob correctly eventually, but something else was bothering me now. So, did you talk to Grace?
Yeah, she told me most of what happened. She must have disliked you a lot.
I wonder why. It's not like I did anything to her. Then Jacob pondered.
Maybe it's homophobia,
he muttered. I didn't understand what he meant, so I asked him back. What do you mean? I don't see any similarities between me and Grace.
I heard she's not doing well in her job. I guess she thinks there's nothing attractive about herself except for being rich. She also seemed to be bored at the party. So what happens if she comes across you, who has a lot of friends?
I see. That's why she hated me. In her eyes, I was a man with nothing but friends. She hated me because I didn't have my own power, but my days seemed to be full of life. I finally understood how she felt, but it did not mean I would put up with her mockery. I'm not a man of nothing. I've worked hard to get where I am today.
I know you did, but she doesn't understand that.
I was a little miffed, so I said so, and Jacob put his hand on my shoulder as if to comfort me. Nora comforted me by saying,
I know how hard you're trying too, Mr. Lewis.
So I felt a little calmer, but I had to do something about Grace for the sake of the company. I had employees to protect.
Then I'll help you. I agree that she needs to be punished a little bit.
He then showed me how to get back at Grace. Nora said she'd help me too, which was reassuring. Anyway, back at the venue, the first thing Jacob did in return was to attack Grace with croissants. Grace, who was presented with a large quantity of croissants, had no idea what they meant, so she ate them happily as usual. The bread, which was a hit item at the famous restaurant, was surprisingly quite tasty. But since it was a chocolate croissant, the crumbly dough made her pure white dress speckled. And when Jacob said,
Your dress looks like a chocolate chip parfait,
the guests laughed, and I later heard that Grace was upset. A few days after the anniversary party, there was a big change in my company. The number of clients had increased. Thanks to this, the sales staff was working without a break, and I was glad that we didn't have to deal with Grace's company. I'm sure Jacob introduced my company to the attendees after the party, so that must have played a role. I heard that Nora also asked her grandfather to put up a poster advertising our company at the hotel. Thanks to that, the company's name recognition was soaring. That's why I've been so busy taking phone calls lately. Sometimes the sales department was short on staff, and sometimes higher-ups contacted me directly, so I had to do the talking. By the time working hours rolled around, I was always exhausted. I suppose that must have reached Grace's ears. She came to my office even though she had no business with me.
Mr. Lewis, there's a woman yelling at the receptionist to let her meet you.
Okay. Put her through to the conference room. I'm sorry for causing you a problem. So after giving instructions to the receptionist, I head to the conference room. And there she was, waiting for me in that room, looking all pale. There was no evidence of the arrogant expression she had on her face at the party. As soon as Grace saw my face, she rushed over to me.
So, you were really the CEO of the company, and you were one of our business partners. After the party, someone from another company told me about you. Why didn't you tell me?
Nora, the woman by my side, told you. You're the one who didn't believe her.
Well, that's true.
I told her the truth, so I didn't want her to make it sound like it was my fault. But about the deal she was talking to the male employee in the sales department, I couldn't argue so strongly because I had eavesdropped. No matter how much she was talking nonsense, I couldn't blame her for that. On the day of the party, I managed to restrain myself from yelling at her because of that. So, what's your business here? I cut right to the chase. If she had told me she was there to apologize, I would have accepted it in stride, but that wasn't the case. Grace seemed to have only self-preservation on her mind.
I'm having a hard time at the office right now. It seems that word has gotten out about what I did to you, and people are calling to cancel our contract. It's like your company is becoming famous for some reason, and because of that, a lot of people know what I did.
I'm sorry to hear that, but you got what you deserved. What she did just came back to haunt her. I hated to believe she was so blind that she couldn't see it. As I stared at her thinking that, Grace looked away. After a considerable pause, she continued in a whisper.
I'm sorry. I apologize. So tell the rest of the company that it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you and I are good friends.
But why? It's not a misunderstanding. We don't get along, and you've been harassing me. When she heard what I said, she shut her mouth and fell silent. Grace was shaking for a while, but it seems that she was not the worst person to mistreat me here. She spoke to me in a weak voice, as if inviting my sympathy.
Please, do something. I have no one else to turn to. All I have is money, and I'm an incompetent department head who can't do her job.
And she apologized to me properly. I knew she was probably calculating, but if she treated me like a decent person, there was no reason for me to get back at her any more than I already had.
I can't just take a new job. I've got my hands full trying to keep people who want to terminate their contracts. I get 100 calls a day, and it haunts me in my dreams.
You're really sorry for what you did.
I'm not lying. Please, believe me.
I sighed and walked out of the room once I saw that Grace wasn't acting. I asked the male employee who had been put on standby to bring coffee and pastries for the guests, then waited. A few minutes later, I grabbed the croissant that the male employee had brought and went back into the room. I probably won't be able to completely undo this. It's going to be a tough situation for a while. But if you still want, I'll give you some help. I'll tell them that we've been through a lot in the past, but we're on good terms now.
David, thank you.
Grace's face lit up as she took a bite of the croissant I offered her. It was the same food that stained her dress, but she seemed to love it. She ate the croissant with a carefree smile like a little child. For a while after that, Grace was in a difficult situation. She texted me complaining that she didn't have time to sleep. But it seemed she wasn't fired. She was still working. She was being criticized as someone who had produced problems for the company. I knew for sure she'd continue to have a hard time, but I was sure she'd be able to handle it. Jacob also appears to care about Grace and is assisting and advising her, so I am confident that things will turn out well for her. As usual, Jacob keeps saying that he can't leave Grace alone for some reason. I've heard that they sometimes go out together on holidays. Even if Jacob is insensitive, if Grace takes a liking to him, their relationship might develop. Right now, though, I'm not sure what's going to happen with them. Meanwhile, my company is growing steadily. The number of companies with which we do business has increased significantly, and production of our products is going well. I'm sure that I can expand overseas. However, as the CEO of a company, I have a lot of work to do. I had to meet with the heads of various companies, so I was under a lot of pressure. But I have hardworking subordinates and dependable friends. Whatever happens, I'm sure we'll get along just fine. When I was taking a break after finishing my work, Nora, who is now my secretary, came to chat with me.
Mr. Lewis, this is your schedule for the month. You only have one day off on this particular day. Would you like to go out with me that day?
Oh, that sounds great. I've been working a lot these days. Where shall we go? I blush as I see her beaming at me, her face near to mine. It seems that the 20-year age difference was not a barrier to our love affair. I'm curious about the relationship between Jacob and Grace, but I believe we need to worry about our own relationship first.